All right, welcome to the Snyder Report. I am your host, Gary Snyder. We'll get to my guest here in a minute. You can see him probably right there. Wave. All right, before we get started with our next guest, we need to remind everybody that we need to thank our sponsors. First up is Robin Winston, does a great job of helping us with the newsletter, which, by the way, goes out to over 100,000 subscribers every single morning. And also a great sponsor of the podcast here. He made all this possible. And we can't forget about former Congresswoman Jill Long Thompson. She has a book out, Across the Aisle, Why Bipartisanship Works for America. So anywhere you buy your books, you can get that one. My guest today is Indianapolis Star. Is it columnist?
Yeah, columnist is good. That works.
Columnist. Okay, James Briggs. James, I would imagine you stay pretty busy there at the Indy Star.
Yeah, there's a lot of news going on, and even when there isn't, there are a lot of things I'm interested in and enjoy talking about and writing about. So yeah, always busy.
Now, does the Star, and I just want to figure out how this works. Does the Star maybe say, "Hey, look at this," or do you have free reign on what you get to write about?
Generally, I get to pick my topics. Every now and then, an editor will float an idea and say, "Hey, this would be good to write about." For the most part, though, I get to pick my topics.
Now, when they float an idea to you, is that kind of like when I played football? You know, workouts were voluntary over the summer.
I'm sure it's
do it.
Yeah, I think it's happened before where I've gotten a sort of a mandatory idea, but I think it's been a very long time. In fact, so this is my second stint at the Star, and I think you'd have to go back to my first stint at the Star for me to even remember the last time that happened. So no time recently. For the most part, I get a tremendous amount of freedom and discretion to write about whatever interests me. And fortunately, a lot of what interests me also interests our audience. So I think that's why it works well.
It's kind of almost like a dream job then, isn't it?
Yeah, I've described it as such many, many times. It absolutely is a dream job.
Now, you write editorials. Now, do you usually catch a lot of grief from one side or the other on what you write about? Because I do, obviously I'm more left of center. So I catch it from Republicans all the time. Occasionally a Democrat won't like what I say and I'll hear it. But do you usually catch a lot of flack from one side or the other or both?
Yeah, I occupy sort of a center-left space.
Mm-hmm.
So I get it from both sides quite a bit. And I've written about this before, but one thing that's really fascinating to me is that the criticism from the left tends to be much more personal and vindictive in a lot of cases. And it's not that like people on the right don't have a lot of nasty things to say. They do, but it's almost like childish. Like it's just like insults when someone on the right often gets mad at me. I can't even think of an example off the top of my head, but it's just like these really childish insults that you'd hear on like a playground in middle school. But when I get it from the left, it's like a local attorney or an architect who's sending me like this really articulate email just questioning my personal values and my soul. And it like stings a little bit more coming from that side because there's just clearly much more thought, whereas the person on the right is just like, you suck. It's very different levels of criticism I get from the two sides.
I would agree with you. Totally see the same thing. When it comes from the right, it's, hey, gap tooth, or hey, idiot. When it comes from the left, it's more thought out, more planned. It's like they took their time to opine that I am a horrible person.
Yeah. The folks on the left don't just want to criticize you; they want you to feel the criticism. I try to take it seriously, and I try to really self-reflect when I receive criticism on what is applicable, what I think has merit, and I try to really think about those things. But yeah, the vehemence comes much harsher from the left, I think.
Now, the reason I wanted you on today is because, you can kind of pick your scandal if you like, but your last couple of articles had to do with Micah Beckwith, who's kind of back in the news today a little bit, and Diego. And I would imagine, as someone who is a little bit center left, you probably find it very easy to write about almost anything happening down at the state house and state government, even to local government.
Yeah, and actually, I wrote about this a couple weeks ago. So I have a weird sort of trajectory. I grew up in rural northern Michigan, and I entered adulthood identifying as a Republican. And I still have fairly conservative views on a wide range of matters. I still feel a personal stake in seeing the Republican Party be a legitimate, fact-based, rational party that emphasizes policy issues over trolling. And for someone who actually legitimately cares about the Republican Party, the last week has been a demonstration of why it's in such shambles right now, and particularly here in Indiana. You mentioned a couple of examples, and you can throw Senator Jim Banks in there too, getting into an elevator in that video that I'm sure most of your audience saw, and you can watch his face and see him processing in real time his opportunity to be a jerk and go viral. It's like other people in that situation where someone and I think the fired federal worker who approached Senator Banks handled that very respectfully, even if he was there to demonstrate in some capacity, which he obviously was. He handled himself very respectfully there. He seems to be a person who legitimately lost his job in the federal government. I don't know why. Maybe that's been revealed in some reporting, but he approaches the senator seeking redress for his grievance. And you can see Jim Banks not responding like a human being, but rather responding like someone who knows that this is an opportunity to go viral to his online fandom. And I think that's the problem with the Republican Party right now, is that you have so many people on the right treating their taxpayer-funded government jobs as an online fandom. And that extends to the examples that you mentioned there. Micah Beckwith and Diego Morales, Indy Star reported last week, they're both driving around in cars that the state purchased for them that are $88,000 and $90,000 respectively for the two of them. At the same time, they and the Doge Bros, as I called them in a column last week, have been for weeks going around talking about how we need property tax cuts in Indiana, and to fund those, local units of government and school districts need to do more with less. We need less money for public parks. We need less money for public schools. We need less money for amenities that would make communities across Indiana more desirable. This is the perspective right now by the lieutenant governor, especially, who has been one of the leading voices in the property tax cut push. And at the same time, he is demanding that local schools, local communities do more with less. He has requested a doubling of his own budget for the lieutenant governor's office, and he's driving around in an $88,000 SUV. You've got to be kidding me. So yeah, it's a really frustrating state of affairs right now in politics, but specifically the Republican Party.
You know, I interviewed former AP reporter out of Indianapolis, Tom LoBianco, last week, and he revealed to us, which just totally caught me off guard, is that he actually got a ride in Micah Beckwith's SUV.
All right.
He was in
I'm
town.
sure it was nice.
He said you can smell the leather days after getting out of it.
I'm sure it has good speakers, some good music.
It's got the whole panoramic roof, the whole bit.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Now we'll stick with Micah real quick, because today or last week he had threatened to trade that vehicle in for a Cybertruck, and he shows up today and parks in his lieutenant governor spot in a Cybertruck, although I think we've come to find out that it was probably borrowed and not traded in.
Yeah, and I mean, that would be another egregious expenditure if he had, as I noted in a Twitter post earlier, that to not only like deal with criticism for his 88,000 SUV, but then to force the state to eat the depreciation on it and trade it in for another car that would cost that much would just be idiocy upon idiocy. So I'm glad to hear that he doesn't seem to have done that. Yeah, that's it. And I thought the Noblesville mayor, Chris Jenson, also on Twitter today, made a really good point.
I was just reading that.
And by the way, he's a Republican, and he is the sort of Republican I think of when I think back to, my early adulthood when I admired the Republican Party. Chris Jenson, the mayor in Noblesville, talked about how he wakes up every day and thinks about ways to make people's lives better, and he hopes that other elected officials do the same thing in Indiana. That's clearly not the case. Micah Beckwith woke up this morning and thought, how do I troll people? How do I get more likes on social media? How do I get more shares, more social engagement? That is how this guy is handling his statewide elected office. And it's all sort of a means to an end. He wants to get another office. He wants to become governor or senator or whatever the case may be. He's just using every single day as a chance to promote his personal brand. And right now, the personal brand in the Republican Party is this online fandom, this MAGA trolling quest to get more engagement on social media.
It seems to me like their opportunity to own the libs, if you will, outweighs actually doing their job of governing.
Yeah, and I mean, I know, obviously Micah Beckwith has views on policy and governance. He's expressed them. I don't know. It's really hard to separate in these sorts of figures what is sincere personal belief and what is sort of lumped into this like posture of trolling. But it doesn't matter. Whatever they're saying is who they are. And right now, what Micah Beckwith is an internet troll, and somehow he has used that platform to get to statewide elected office. I would argue he's done that because of the weakness of the Indiana Republican Party, because of the weakness of Governor Mike Braun as a leader, is how it created space for someone like Micah Beckwith to get into the position. And same goes for Diego Morales. He seized on the weakness of the Indiana Republican Party to get into a position to become Secretary of State. And what you've seen is sort of a breakdown of the establishment on the Republican side, and particularly during the Donald Trump era, when there's been so much populist energy within the party, a lot of people who weren't really paying attention to politics pre-Trump have gotten more engaged, and they love Trump, and they love people who act like Trump, which is people like Beckwith and people like Diego Morales. And this is sort of the consequence of that, is you're not getting sincere public servants in office right now. You're getting people who wake up every day and think, how do I get more likes on social media? And Micah Beckwith's answer today was to roll up in a Cybertruck.
When you see that, they're very similar, at least their path to the office that they have. They've both ran for other office in primaries and lost horribly, but they have come to realize, and give them credit for this, that they've both come to realize that they can't win in a primary, but they can win in a caucus or a convention where there are far fewer people making that decision. And usually those people are far more radical, and that goes for left or right, than the voting public.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even necessarily say they can't win a primary. Just because they haven't yet doesn't mean they can't. I assume someday Beckwith will test that. He did once running for Congress. I assume he will test it again on a statewide platform eventually. But I think that's concerning. You are correct. I think the convention going Republicans are much further to the right. They're also much more populist minded. They're more inclined to vote for someone who sort of makes this emotional appeal, like a Beckwith and a Diego, over someone who's actually qualified for the job. So it is more likely in those Republican conventions, which votes for other offices like Attorney General and Secretary of State and Treasurer. There's more of an opportunity in those offices that go the convention route rather than the primary route to get some of Senator Banks would call them clowns. Through to the finish line. But I wouldn't say it's impossible for some of these figures to break through in a primary. It could happen.
Now, you had written, I believe it was you in the past, that Micah Beckwith was pretty much going to dominate the Braun governance, if you will. Are you still seeing that just, months?
So yeah, the day he broke through in the convention last year to become the lieutenant governor nominee over then Senator Braun, now Governor Braun's preferred running mate, that was my column. That's the headline. I think was Mike Braun deserves every minute of his new political hell, and right now we are in Mike Braun's political hell. He's living it. Yeah, I would say even before Mike Braun became governor, his time has been hijacked by Micah Beckwith, and the property tax debate is a really good example of that. I just can't imagine any world where, free of Micah Beckwith, Mike Braun enters office willing to spend all of his political capital on a property tax plan that half of his party hates and the other half is ready to hold him to. It's just an impossible situation for Mike Braun because the legislature does not want to pass the kind of property tax plan, the cuts that Micah Beckwith wants. Braun entered office sort of boxed in. And I have to give a tremendous amount of credit to a WIBC host, Rob Kendall, who had been sort of promoting this as a top issue. And Micah Beckwith got on board. And when Micah Beckwith became the lieutenant governor nominee last year, Mike Braun went through the gauntlet and showed up on WIBC and Rob Kendall's show and talked about how he was going to do property tax reform. And now he's stuck. And this has become just an albatross for Mike Braun. I mean, this is going to define his entire time in office, however this shakes out on property taxes. And you're seeing it this week where it really looks like we're going to end up with just some minor tweak, which I think was always fated to be the outcome on this issue. But it's not going to be what Micah Beckwith wants. It's not going to be what the Micah Beckwith fans want, WIBC wants. And so it's not going to satisfy a large segment of the Republican base. You would not be seeing the fight to this extent if Mike Braun had been a better leader last year and one, picked a running mate who had more sway over convention delegates, or two, had done more work to get his pick through. It is absolutely inexcusable that Mike Braun, as the de facto leader of the party after winning his own gubernatorial primary last year, couldn't pick a running mate who could win at the convention. That is absolutely a failure of leadership by Mike Braun, and he is living every day the consequence of that failure.
And, the property tax issue seems to have united Republican and Democrat alike across the state when it comes to municipalities and county government.
Yeah, it's sort of an uncomfortable alliance, probably in many cases, but I think there have been times when you've seen just what a ridiculous sham of an issue this is, particularly when Republican mayors in central Indiana, like really, really good, thoughtful Republican mayors, have been mocked by figures on the right for making the case that, hey, like we have a good city that people want to move to. We're successful, we're growing, and if you pass a major property tax cut, it's going to prevent us from doing the types of things that make us the city people want to live in. And it's true. It's, Michael Hicks has written for us quite a bit in great detail about how amenities drive population trends right now. And we're seeing that in central Indiana. And the mayors of cities that have been really, really successful have stated their case and have been mocked by people on the right and by the tribe of Micah Beckwith. Again, I assume that Governor Mike Braun, who himself has a long career as a business leader, I assume he would be sort of amenable to those types of conversations with folks like the Carmel mayor, Sue Finkum, and the Noblesville mayor, who we talked about earlier, Chris Jenson. I assume they would be able to have, among themselves, very rational conversations. But Micah Beckwith just injects a level of chaos into these discussions because he's harnessed some sort of energy on the right that really wants like these deep property tax cuts at the expense of all else, at the expense of public school funding, at the expense of amenities that people vote for and move to cities for in Indiana. And another interesting thing about that, I think, is, in the gubernatorial primary, much of the conversation wasn't about property taxes, it was about income taxes. That was something that Suzanne Crouch campaigned on, wanting to cut income taxes. And it's sort of the focus that became this hardcore focus on major property tax cuts sort of came after all of that. And we've just come a long way. And much of it has been, I think, Micah Beckwith's successful rogue campaign to become lieutenant governor, despite not being picked by the gubernatorial nominee last year.
Before we switch gears just a tad, any prediction on how this property tax cut plays out?
My baseline assumption all along has been that the Indiana General Assembly will pass something really minor. I don't think there's a tremendous amount of budget flexibility to do what the Micah Beckwiths of the world want to do, even though they will call you a crybaby for wanting to uphold certain levels of spending in schools and cities and suburbs. I don't think the room is there to do what they want to do, and I think enough Republican lawmakers understand that and believe that, and I think we're sort of seeing that this week. I don't think anything real major is going to end up passing.
Now, just shifting gears just a tad, we'll go down the hallway and go to the Secretary of State's office, where in your latest article, you did pretty much call for the impeachment of Secretary of State Diego Morales.
Yeah, enough. And at some point, it just has to be enough. I mean, it was enough before he entered office, even. I mean, you can just, I'm so tired of listing all of these things. Every time I write a column about him, it's a mile long, the list of, I wrote a lot about him when he was running for Secretary of State. He almost certainly voted illegally when he was running for Congress before he ran for Secretary of State. He's mischaracterized his military service. He lied on his resume. Um, he has sexual assault allegations from women who are Republican and who are, from prominent families in the Republican Party. And the Republican Party stood by Morales anyway as he was running for Secretary of State. I mean, there were any number of reasons that the Republican Party should have found a way to defeat him when he was running again through a convention to become Secretary of State, but then also to step away from him. I mean, he was just such a toxic candidate, but they stood by him, and he's Secretary of State now. Now, since he's been Secretary of State, he's been spending money on all sorts of like trinkets that I have one right now. My pretzels are being held together by a Diego Morales chip clip. Has Diego Morales a really big word, big letters on it. Why the state paid for my chip clip, I don't know, but it did. So thanks to the state for my fresh pretzels. But he hired his brother-in-law for a 6-figure salary. He gave his brother-in-law, among many other staffers, inexplicable bonus that doesn't seem to be going around the rest of state agencies, but for some reason Diego Morales did. We find out last week he's got a $90,000 car. We find out that he purchased it from the Kelly Automotive Group. I believe that's the official name of it, up
here where we are. Yeah.
Up in Fort Wayne, and it happens to be a company that has donated $65,000 to his Secretary of State campaign. And again, like, maybe it's coincidental, maybe like he really just wanted one particular color that was available up in Fort Wayne at that particular dealership, but it sure looks bad. But when you add it all,
carries black SUVs in Indiana.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a rare, exotic color. It's hard to imagine it being available anywhere in Indianapolis where the Secretary of State actually is and works. But you just put all of this together. I mean, again, like there was a story a week or two ago that Diego Morales was just off in India for unknown reasons. Like, for a minute, we couldn't even figure out where he was. It turns out he's in India on an economic development mission. Like, that's the governor's responsibility, or the IEDC's responsibility. The Secretary of State has nothing to do with economic development, and yet he's traveling India on some sort of covert foreign mission. I mean, this is all insane. It is insane that Diego Morales...
And we find out through his social media posts online.
Yeah, we just still, to the best of my knowledge, unless something's broken on that since I last heard, I don't think we know who paid for that trip yet. And it's just day after day after day of these types of things from our Secretary of State. He never should have been elected Secretary of State. He was one of the worst statewide candidates in Indiana history, one of the most blatantly corrupt and dishonest candidates in Indiana history. And wouldn't you know it, he's become one of the most blatantly corrupt and dishonest statewide office holders in Indiana history. And we're either going to let him do this through next year when he's up for re-election again. There've been stories. Adam Wren has reported that Republicans are looking to unseat him at next year's convention. But there's a remedy available right now, and that is that the Indiana General Assembly could initiate impeachment proceedings on him. And they could start that anytime they want to. And I think there's more than enough evidence right now that he is going to just keep misusing taxpayer funds, using his office as a personal fiefdom up until the moment he's not allowed to anymore. And I think the Indiana General Assembly should act now and stop this.
Does he survive until next year? And if he does he get the nomination again?
So I think he will survive for reasons that we were talking about earlier. The Indiana General Assembly is tied up with this property tax thing, and they've got a budget to pass. And even if they weren't really busy right now, I doubt they're listening to me or too concerned with what I think about the Secretary of State.
I think you might be surprised.
Yeah, no, I think that they care, but I don't think they care enough to prioritize it. I think they probably view some political risk there. Again, he's a Republican. He might be corrupt, but he's doing corruption as a Republican, and so there's not as much incentive to do anything about it. But I don't sense there's any movement likely on that. I think there's a really strong case for it, or I wouldn't have written the column, but I just don't see it happening. Does he make it through the convention next year? I don't know. That's a really interesting question. He certainly had a lot of fans when he ran at the convention in 2026, and it was funny. I was a columnist there at the convention, and the just like when Micah Beckwith won last year, the establishment line at the time was that Holly Sullivan, the Holcomb
Right.
preferred Secretary of State, she's got this. Don't worry. So many people I heard that going into the convention, driving to the convention, all the messages I was getting were Holly Sullivan's got this. Don't worry. And I pull up to the state fairgrounds where the convention was in 2022, and I see this horde of green shirts walking around the premises, and I'm thinking, I don't know, these are a lot of people wearing Diego Morales shirts, and sure enough, he broke through. Do all of those people get tired? I mean, they knew at the time all of these things, and that's what I wrote about the other day, is that every single person who had any hand in Diego Morales' ascension to Secretary of State knew who he was, knew his background, knew all the things that he had already lied about, and they still supported him. Do they change their minds now for some reason? I don't know.
I don't think they do. I
Yeah,
think those people that supported him 2 years ago will support him next year, simply because of what we discussed earlier. That caucus, that convention is made up of the most extreme of the party, and that extreme supports Diego.
And there's also an element to that of when someone is sort of under fire, like Diego Morales, there's like sort of a hunkering down, you know, and like an us versus them effect too, where I think some people might feel motivated to support him just because he's being attacked, and they will accuse the other side of, you know, fake news and unfair, you know, whatever. So there's a lot of that, I think, too, that motivates support for a particular candidate who's facing a lot of criticism.
James, before we let you run here, I know we're running out of time. Anything else you wanted to cover today? What are you looking at for your next column?
I've not written about Jim Banks yet. I may get around to that. I may incorporate some of the things we've talked about. Just this general unfortunate moment where all of these elected Republicans are just treating their offices as a fandom. I may do something like that. I'm not sure. I tend to not know exactly what my column is going to be until I'm done with it. So I tend to just have a lot of ideas sort of in my head, and I type things out. And when I'm done, I know what my column is.
Well, as someone who ran against Jim Banks 2 years ago for Congress, you know, you can't go wrong writing about Jim Banks. Well,
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's stunning the lack of competition he faced from the Republican Party. You know, everyone just sort of like stepped to become senator. I mean, everyone just sort of like stepped aside and let him go. And there's much to criticize for Jim Banks. And I do think, and you know, one of the things I am following very closely right now are the tariffs, President Trump's tariffs that are just absolutely wrecking the economy right now. And I think there could be a real political shift right now. I mean, we are heading toward what looks like, barring some major change, a recession of choice by the president. One person is deciding policy that is going to push us into recession. And you have figures like Jim Banks lying to the public. I mean, he knows that these policies are going to be really bad for, I mean, not just, you can't even like pick a constituency. It's bad for everyone. The president right now is making us all poorer right now. That is not hypothetical. It is happening right now. And Jim Banks is telling us, actually, this is great. Actually, he's going to revive manufacturing. Eventually, the lie gets to a level where people just see that it's not true. And I do wonder if this starts to, I wonder if we're heading toward such a political catastrophe. I hope not, because I would like us to not go into recession. My preference would be we come out of this somehow. I don't know what the off ramp is, but it looks highly likely we are heading toward such a bad economic circumstance that it could be a political catastrophe for the Republican Party. And all of these folks on the right lying to the public to support Trump's horrible economic policies, Jim Banks being one of the top guys, J.D. Vance being another one. I do wonder if they face some political consequences down the line. Jim Banks has been untouchable as of late, but he's putting so many eggs in the Trump MAGA tariff basket. I do wonder if he's facing a different situation down the road once we see the effects of these policies.
James, where can people find your work, social media, all that good stuff?
IndyStar.com. My columns are often right there on the homepage, or you can click on the opinion tab there. And Twitter, Blue Sky at James E. Briggs.
And I know we put links in our newsletter to them quite often because I read them all.
Well, thanks.
Count me as a fan guy, I guess.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
All right. Before we let everyone go here, we need to remind everyone, we need to thank Robin Winston for his sponsorship of our newsletter, which goes out to over 100,000 subscribers every day here in Indiana. And he's been instrumental in getting the podcast up and running. And also former Congresswoman Jill Long Thompson, her book, Across the Aisle, Why Bipartisanship Works for America, is out. Go buy it at any place you buy your books. I'm Gary Snyder. He's not. He's James Briggs. This is the Snyder Report podcast, and we're out.